This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Thomas Brown, a mental health advocate, artist, author, and podcaster. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on your show, Phantom. This is awesome. I'm excited.
Well, thank you. It's always great to talk to new folks every day. We talk to people pretty much. We're a daily podcast most of the time, and I want to let people know that we're also a featured podcast on the Newsly Network. You see that icon up there. Listen on Newsly. Later, we'll have the audio version on Newsly tonight. We are a featured podcast there. If you've never checked that network out, you can use coupon code GHOST and check that out for 1 month free. But we also have your www.risephoenix.org URL for your website, and that will be fully clickable for anybody that's interested. That you can check that out at any time when we're published. That link is fully connected. So right now It's not, but you'll be able to click through it anywhere that we can be. You'll see the description for the podcast. So before we get really into all the details of your story, I have a couple questions I always ask everybody that comes on the show. What motivates you and why do you do what you do?
That's a great question. I think it's important for all of us to know that, for all of us to ask that question on a daily basis. I feel like self-awareness is the most important aspect of the human experience. And for reasons either for negligence or nefarious, it's not promoted in our society. And yet it's the most important aspect of living. What motivates me? There's just a scratch inside of me. I've always been a creative person. I always had these grand ideas when I was a little kid, and I would write little synopsises for stories. Once I got a little bit older, in my 20s, got into film school, I was much more of a visual artist, I'm really into photography and motion film, doing short films and stuff like that. I found that I had a pretty good niche for, I have pretty good talent for screenwriting. I really appreciated that. I was better at screenwriting than any other type of writing because you write the way people talk. I was not very good at all the rules of literature. But that all changed after I did my bike ride and I learned how to write a book. And that's what I did. But there's this, I don't have a word for it. There's this just thing inside of me that needs to express and create. And I don't know what it is, but it always astonishes me when people say that they don't have that. I can't compute it. I don't understand it. And if I'm not creating something on some level,
I think they sell themselves short.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they just haven't really allowed them the space and time to explore that. But if I didn't allow myself to create, I'm in my creative room that my partner and I share. She's a painter. I could sit there. I love to sit on the chair next to her while she's painting and I'm writing. I just love being in that space. I love, I just don't understand why people we're here and it's up to us to create meaning in this existence that we're on. We're on this organic living starship that is floating through an endless, infinite void that is constantly expanding. And the only way it's going to end, for the planet itself is when our star explodes, trillions of years from now. So I just we have to I want to. I have this need to create meaning in my life for the short time that I'm here.
In your lifetime, yeah. Well, I think
that's
being a creative myself. I think that's. I talk to a lot of creative people, from filmmakers to authors, musicians, even people who are CEOs that create their own companies, entrepreneurs. They're creative, and I think it's that spark. And being a musician, I kind of have this the idea of the muse, because I was very much into Victorian poets, right? Before I got into music, I was into poetry, in the Harlem Renaissance, any kind of poetry, and music is like writing. A lot of music is the same skill set as a writer, except that
you're telling a story,
sound aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
you're
telling a story.
and like,
Even if there's no words. Even if there's no words, you're telling a story.
Yeah. You still tell, I always talk about sound paintings. Like music can trigger memories based on whatever the frequency of the sound wave or the percussive effect of it. And I'm a synthesist. So I've got all my old school Moogs and Rolands, and
That's
I
awesome.
design sounds before I even write a song. I'll take a triangle wave or a sine wave and create my own tone before I even get to actually writing the song. And so, because I want to have my own unique vision of what I hear in my head. And it's this idea, like I was talking about the muse, you get like poets like William Blake and Tennyson, Wordsworth, they always feel like, well, there's just something's coming and we can channel into and out of it. Right.
I totally believe that.
And the out. Yeah. And I think that's what all creative people do, no matter what level you're at, from the person who's doing a TED talk and is very organic and they can pull the stuff in their head and they can read the room. That's still creativity, right? Totally. You can do it every day, whether you realize it or not.
And one of the things, like, so the book is about a bike ride that I did with a buddy for suicide awareness back in 2012. Excuse me. So the book's called 2012, A Bicycle Odyssey. The subtitle is A 7,000-Mile Bicycle Journey for Suicide Awareness and the Healing Power of Art. We are a part of our philosophy that we kind of like gathered from, inspired from other sources, is that we think if you don't consider yourself a painter, if you don't consider yourself a poet, a musician, a writer, look at your life as like this giant empty canvas, and each choice that you make is the palette of colors that you're attributed to. Like, be playful with your life, because from the beginning to the end, it's a movie. There's a reason why like we connect with each other through art, is because a human being can't create a piece of art that isn't inspired by the human condition. You can't create a piece of art that's inspired by the Martian condition, because we have no understanding of that other life form. All we have is the understanding of our of humanity. So anything that we create comes from the human condition and all the questions that we ask. Mainly, like, who am I? What am I doing here? And what is all this happening around me? So I always tell people, like, this happened, therefore this happened. That is a narrative of your life. So be mindful, be present, and understand that like your choices not only like create a massive ripple effect creates a new frequency for where you're going, but it can also inspire in both positive and negative ways and create those ripple effects for your circle of influence, however big or small that may be. So we were inviting people to be present with their lives and start there. And that also started the conversation of self-awareness. And I mean, that's a big way of how I even manage my own mental health issues, is through a meditative practice of like self-awareness. And part of that, the pillar of that is being a creative person.
Yeah, I think it's real important to kind of put those pieces together like in a holistic way, where, a lot of us today are kind of put into these real narrow spaces. People want to like think inside the box, right? I think a creative person, we always think out of the box. If you think about a bell curve, we're on the outer edges of the bell curve, right? Because we push it like, and sometimes it's hard to measure a creative and say, oh, well, that works and it doesn't work. Because a lot of times, if you're doing something that's not been seen before or not been heard before or not been thought out before, the initial reaction is for people to hate it. Like, there are tons of examples, like, Jim Morrison came out with the way the Doors were, and people are like, what's that? Hendrix.
Yeah, that's weird.
Use of feedback. You're not supposed to. Recording engineers say, we got to edit that out. It's like, no, don't edit it out. And so there's always a tendency when somebody's a creative, there's a vulnerability and then the authenticity. Well, initially people don't like that. And you have to take a risk, because the first time you put it out there, most of the time people are going to say they don't like it. And you have to understand it's like the law of attraction. And there are people that will come to it and there are people that won't. You can't let the people that don't like it keep you from self actualizing and do it, because eventually you'll find your tribe. They'll come
Yeah.
to you if you keep on
And
showing up.
that's an interesting thing too about being a creative. Like the written word was not my forte. And like I said earlier, like writing a screenplay, no matter how big or small that is a completely different skill set of writing a book. So I was very, there's a vulnerability in releasing your creative expression into the world. You have to be willing to like eat whole piles of dog shit, from people, or you just ignore it and you just say, my intention.
Get the red
I needed
bars.
to.
Like,
I had a friend of mine who's
yeah.
also a musician, and I I went through 4 drafts before I gave my book to an editor, and I gave it to people that I know, some highbrow literary people. So they knew my voice as a person, but I wanted them to like tear it to shreds from like their own, literary snobbery. And when I got it back from the second person, I knew that it was going to be another mountain to climb for all the edits. And my musician buddy, Rob, I think he thought I was going to rewrite the whole thing. He's like, don't rewrite it. I was like, no, I'm just going to edit it. He's like, good. Because the point as a creative is that you get it out. All right. And you take the lessons from that project and you apply them to the next one. Like otherwise you're going to be stuck on this one. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect for the world. It's definitely never going to be perfect for you. Get it out of your system, move forward, and any mistakes that you learn afterwards, after the fact, apply those lessons to your next project.
It's a lesson learned. It's the
Yeah,
lesson learned, because a lot of times with musicians today, I would say, because we have all these tools, and the authors, we have all these computer tools now, right? And so you could take your original thought, you could run through Chat GPT, you could run through AI, you can do all this stuff, right? But you can get away from the original intent. If I'm a musician and I play a bass line that's not exactly on the beat, but it's a little off the beat, right? Well, that could be funk. That could be bebop.
Yeah.
It could be something. It could be legitimate, but if you're trying to be in some very narrow spectrum, you're going to think it's not good enough, and then you might keep on playing like 100 takes.
Yeah.
And really, what happens as a producer, I look at things like, you know what, the first 3 takes are closer to the original idea. By the time you get to take 100, you kind of destroyed the idea.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to say, you know what, this is a piece of art, like a painting. It's a point in time, and that's what it is. And a lot of times today, we have so many tools where we forget that, and we keep on going over and over, and we wreck the art. And I always have to tell younger people, because I'm a child of the 70s, like, I like to use multi-tracks and not use the DAW and just put it down the way it is.
Yeah.
And I live with it.
Yeah.
Because somebody's going to like it, and somebody's going to see something in it, and it's going to draw people to it, instead of being like the happy accident is really a big thing in all art, and even science.
Yes.
Like things that are unintended end up being like the best thing ever.
I always found that in film school. Like when I had an idea of what my film was going to be. I wrote the script. I did the God, I can't even think of the word for it right now. But where you create scene by scene storyboard. Thank you. I wrote the script, created the storyboard, had my shot list, everything scheduled, ready to go. We shoot it. I have all of the media that I need based on like what started as an idea in my head. Now I sit in the editing bay, and like something just happens. It's like each stage, a new happy accident will happen. And when you're in the editing bay, you have everything that you need. In film school, there's no reshoots. We don't have budget for like, $4 million reshoots. I just have to like use what I use. And, it feels like the story is like, okay, you had an idea, but it's the muse or like the universal force. Like we have like an antenna, and there's these like just these wavelengths that are going out, and we catch one, and our ego kind of filters down our own interpretation of that signal, and but there's a part where it's like, no, this is what I'm supposed to be. So like in the editing of the post-production of a short film, it always came out different than what I originally intended and I think always for the
There's
better.
a lot of work there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it like you think about it, you initial put down something as an artist, a writer, and
Yeah.
then you go back and you look at things and you start to kind of you look at the totality of what you're doing and you say, hey, I can tweak this, I can tweak that. And a lot of times it's just a matter of perspective. Sometimes I'll go back to a piece of something I did a month ago and then come at it a new way and say, hey, this actually fits where my head's at now. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
fitting where my head was at before. So I let it go and I come back to it. And so like a lot of times it's like, yeah, it's really point in time. The creative process is like when your head kind of gets in the right space at the right time, at the right moment, with the right tools and the right things in front of you, then you see the path. And
Yeah.
sometimes you have to be willing to listen to that because a lot of times I think some people are not willing to listen to their muse.
Yeah.
They're kind of just, oh, I can't trust that. I got to go with something left, right brain. It's like you mess things up. Because if you're like, it's like somebody that like, they say about in music, like there's no wrong note. There are opportunities, but you can
Yeah.
treat it like a bad note if you stop the song. If you're at the band and you stop and you say, we got to go back to the top, right? Instead of like Herbie Hancock and Miles Davis, Hancock hits a chord. It wasn't expected. Miles Davis takes advantage of that and changes the direction of the song. And nobody even
Yeah.
knows they made a mistake. It's a different way of thinking compared to maybe a classical musician saying, hey, I hit the Chopin, I hit the wrong thing. I got to start the whole thing again. No, it's like it's an opportunity to evolve the song. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a different perspective. It's like if you have that mindset, it's like then you have a very expansive point of view.
Yeah. And you know what? As creatives, like we become accustomed to that. We've had enough experience working on different creative projects that we're used to that. We might even be resistant to it, but we're used to it. And when we can get out of our own way, we can allow those happy accidents to take hold. But the same thing can be applied to people in their day-to-day life, in the decisions that they make. And that's what another thing that I mean about like looking at your life as like a piece of art or a story, is that you can have an idea for this thing that
Yeah,
you've got to do,
canvas.
and then boom, all these things change. I had these big grand ideas for what the bike ride could be, and it completely changed. It was much more
And then it
intimate.
became something else.
It totally became. I mean, I even met the love of my life at the end of this journey. I didn't know she existed. She didn't know
So
I
the
existed.
7,000 miles at the end of it, you met her.
She no, I mean, I had met her
Eh,
through email. She was the contact for the place that we ended at. We ended at this art retreat center, the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors.
Oh,
That is the artists Alex and Allison Gray. It's their art retreat center. And when we were finally put in contact with them, Allison Gray and I were corresponding, and she's like, "Look, I'm going to put you in the hands of our art retreat, um, our um, our hospitality manager and event coordinator, Sharon Steluto, and she'll take it from there." And it was just like professional emails once a month until like 2 days before we got there. I would contact all of I'd call, make a phone call to all of our contacts like a night or two before we arrived, just to like give them some expectations. And they were usually like 5 minute long, 10 minute long conversations. I talked to Sharon for an hour, and I had to Google stalk her because I really liked the sound of her voice. And I once I met her, I convinced her that you don't have to shovel sunshine. So she moved from New York here to Arizona to be with me, and like that's just like some crazy stuff. I mean, and what makes it even crazier, I when we have an experience happen to us, when we experience a trauma, and this can go for art too, but I'm going to make this relatable to everybody because this is mind blowing. I think about this every day. Sharon is a constant reminder of this, and that's this. We're going to have an experience, and it could be traumatic. And our egos have to say that was a bad thing and it hurt. That's not wrong, but once you like separate yourself from the emotion and you're like a little bit more grounded and in logic, essentially it's just an experience. And that experience can either be poison for you or it can be a lesson that you can learn from. All right.
Yeah.
There is if my brother doesn't die by suicide, I'm not inspired to ride my bike 7,000 miles across the country. And if I don't ride my bike 7,000 miles across the country, I don't meet Sharon Steluto over 3,000 miles away from me.
Yeah.
And she's the love of my life. So it's just like,
no, it's interesting.
Yeah. I
such a interesting.
You can't ask me to trade
things that happen in the, what.
Yeah. And you can't,
you never know. Is that's what people, they want to have the perfectly planned life.
Mm-hmm.
Not, it's like, oh, it's just a calm ocean. Right. But everybody knows when you're on the ocean, it's not always going to be calm. You're going to have to get through a storm to get to the other shore. And sometimes that storm gives you the ability to handle the next thing that happens. Right. So if you didn't go through that storm, you're not going to know how to handle it. Because the ocean's always calm. How are you ever going to handle adversity? So, and a lot of times with art, it is the pain. It is the trauma. That's what drives most artists, whether, in any form. The best work comes from being able to process through that trauma as like a cathartic capability and turn it into some piece of art. And I think that, if you have to all the time, it's hard to do that.
Yeah. And I think it's like either extreme. Like the artist's job is really to like observe the world around them, observe the experiences that they've had and interpret back to society. And it's usually the extremes that we're interpreting back to society. That could be an extreme of despair or an extreme of complete and utter, dumbstruck bliss. But it's just wild to know. And I think
the bliss has an effect either way. It's in good points.
Yeah. But it's wild. Like we are works of art in a sense. And I think it's important for people to remind themselves of that. How much mystery, no matter how mundane your life may seem and how ordinary and how regimented it might be, like you're still a mystery waiting to be unfolded. And you have to give yourself give yourself the time.
Yeah, there's nobody.
Yeah, and you have to give yourself the time and space to. And I will. And I will submit to the idea that like it takes a certain amount of privilege for somebody to have the ability to examine themselves. It's really hard to do if you're in fight or flight all the time. So there is a sense I always have to like recognize that my sense of privilege of not being in fight or flight all the time, to where I'm allowed the space to examine all that I am.
That's interesting, because if you think about like some forms of art, like it is that kind of fight or flight, like in the blues.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of bluesmen, they kind of went through the ringer. And it is kind of embedded in the culture of the blues is that kind of despair, and even some parts of bebop jazz is the pain and the hard life that drives the work. Now there's other types of art and music where you get a guy like Stevie Wonder talks about things that are more like happiness, and he can generate a lot of interesting music, like songs that in the key of life. There's a lot of uplifting music there, and there's commentary, but there's a lot of music he did that, and the idea of funk, if you think about James Brown, and it's like, is he really saying something as poignant as Dylan? Sometimes, but a lot of times it's like dance, get out there and move. And
totally.
In itself, there still can be pain behind it, but he was able to find the happiness and the kind of joyfulness. And So there are extremes to everything, but I think it's when you figure out how to like weave your story, however you're going to tell it.
Hmm.
And I think everybody has a story to tell. And that's, a lot of people say, well, I got to be Dylan or I got to be Robert De Niro. I got to be Orson Welles. No, you don't.
You
Right.
just got to be
You can
you.
still have impact. You go on TikTok and you could be you. You could go and do a 30-second, like say something that is you. And you'd be surprised from the law of attraction, how many people will dig you.
Hmm.
Right, and you
Yeah.
didn't realize that they would, and so many people are doing that where they find like, wow, people are digging who I am, and I mean, I'm kind of quirky. Where everybody has a way of saying something. It's like if you do that and you don't get scared of it, you
Yeah.
can
I
find
think
that you actually have an ability to do something.
especially if you're coming at it from like, you know, you're being honest about who you are and you're not trying to um especially with like
Project, yeah.
online and like with like influencers and stuff, like people are they get addicted to the idea of like chasing the algorithm. So
Oh yeah,
they're like, let me create something that I know that people like. And you said it earlier, like you
I
can't do
can't,
that as an
can't wait.
artist, as a
I
true
can't wait.
artist. Like you have to swim in the chaos, and things are gonna happen that you're like, I didn't want that to happen. God, that's not working, and you just have to like let go and just be like,
Yeah,
okay, this is what's happening. How do I? What is it? What is the piece trying to tell me? What is life trying to tell me? And how do I integrate it? How do I like move from this point forward, either in my life or the thing that I'm trying to express to the world?
well, the problem
Please,
with the
man.
algorithms is that their bias is in the machine, right? And
Totally.
so their bias is in the machine, right? And so there's a lot of stuff that's like, if you're on the outer edges of the bell curve, which a lot of
Hmm.
artists are, the algorithm's
Yeah.
not looking for that, right? And it's a machine and it's got biases and it's going like it'll put the cat video that has the same bit of music that every other cat video has. And you'll see
Yeah.
like all these recommendations to use music that's already been used, right? So that
Yeah.
what's the good of putting out a post the same song that a million people used and the same video that a million people already saw, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you might make that might be get a million views, but what's the real impact, right? So the idea is like if you're an artist or if you put something out in the world, just because you have a million views doesn't mean you actually were that impactful.
Yeah.
Sometimes if something hits the right person or the right people, you get opportunities that the million views don't actually represent. I've had situations where certain posts didn't get that many numbers, but then I got an opportunity to work on something that if I hadn't put it out there, it's like your situation would have met your wife if you hadn't gone through certain things. Certain things lead to other things, and they're not always on the metrics. It wouldn't be predictable. There's like, oh, well, that's going to predict success. You have no idea, right? You
Yeah.
just have to kind of experiment with your life and be willing to embrace the uncertainty factor, which is vulnerability, and
Yeah.
authenticity, rather than trying to be into the copy, clone, cut and paste world that we like to be living in now.
There's a part in my book that I talk about when we finally get to Cosm, the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. And Alex Gray, his paintings and his philosophy of art is another piece of the puzzle for me that was inspiring for me in the Rise philosophy that we created. I'm a big fan of the band Tool, and Alex Gray did the album
Mhm.
covers for Lateralis, 10,000 Days, in Fear Inoculum. And as soon as I saw his art, I loved it. I just thought it was very beautiful. There was, a very spiritual connection to what he was trying to show the world. And he, his view on the importance of art being like healing, and both for the artist and for the viewer. So I just remember like sitting there. They have full moon ceremonies on the property every month, and they have speakers. My cycling partner and I, Zach, got to speak at this full moon ceremony, and there was like musicians and other speakers and performers. It was just a great night. And then once we're done, it's just music, dance, and fire spinning everywhere. It was really beautiful. But I noticed how people have a tendency to kind of like, oh, there's greatness there. I want to be around it. And I think we're all guilty
Mm-hmm.
for a little bit. We've all had those
Yeah.
experiences. It dawned on me in that moment the important, like, that there is a huge difference between adoration and inspiration. Like, inspiration is like the thing that the
Mm-hmm.
viewer gets. There's this transference, this currency that goes back and forth from
Yeah.
the creative who's creating and performing and the audience member. And like, it's inspiration. And the idea is that, like, if you're fueled by this inspiration, go out into the world and make something beautiful, even if it's only for you, or for like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
small group of people in your circle of influence. If you don't, if you waste that inspirational energy, if you waste that transaction, it just becomes adoration, and it's more
Adoration. Yeah.
disempowering. You disempower yourself.
Well, because
You just
you
take
think that
away.
only the person that you're adoring is
Yeah,
capable of doing that. You don't think that you're capable. Where
they're
then
the
if
only ones that
you're
are
like,
capable of doing that. I'm capable of doing
yeah,
something different, but
or something else.
like, yeah. So I just think that that's an important lesson to learn, and showing, like, the importance of you as a creative when you're going through stuff. And because you're going to be inspired by stuff, you're going to be inspired by stories. I'm constantly inspired. I'm not a musician. I don't pretend to be. I have a guitar that I bought once. I noodle it every once in a while, but I love music. I don't know how to read it, but like, I know how it makes me feel. I think the
Yeah, it
feeling
can
would
make
be
you
even
be creative
deeper.
in a different way. I mean,
Yeah,
you could listen to music and be working on your film or working on your writing, and it inspires you. So like different art forms can inspire other art forms.
yeah,
So it's all good.
yeah. And I think it's just people, like, need to understand, like, what they're capable of doing if they just put their minds to it, and understand that, like, it doesn't have to be done tomorrow. Like, it took me 12 years to write
No,
this book.
not right.
it,
Well, yeah, I
it
mean,
took me,
everybody's on their own timeline.
yeah,
Everybody's on their own timeline for what's in your world, right? It's your world. It's your view. If it, some people can do something at a certain pace, but just because they do doesn't mean that you have to do your work on the same pace. But that's the comparison trap. We get people that's like, oh, well, this person's able to do X amount in this amount of time. So if I can't, then I don't measure up. So then I'm not, then you're already in imposter syndrome, and then you're done. It's
yeah.
like, well, I can't do it. It's like you just give yourself a
And
reason
it,
not to do it.
and even if you have that imposter syndrome, I kind of like live in that area all the time. It's not going to stop me from doing it. I might feel like shit while I'm doing it, but I'm going to keep moving forward. You know, I think it's
You
just
keep on going,
important to,
but you're
yeah,
pushing through it. You're pushing
yeah,
through it, but you're not being limited. You're not letting
yeah,
a limiting belief stop you from actually execute. There are some
yeah.
people that actually let that totally stop them. And it's like you got the painter with the 100 paintings in their loft. And
Hmm.
when somebody comes up and looks at it and says, how come this is in the gallery? What's not ready? Well, there are people that are
Yeah,
less capable than you that have stuff in galleries, and like it's all you in your head that's stopping you from actualizing because you don't think you're ready. I mean, if you think
yeah.
about like the punk aesthetic, you think about the punk aesthetic, you think of the bands like the Ramones and the
Yeah.
Clash and the Sex Pistols, they were a reaction to the progressive rockers who were like
Hmm.
perfect musicians. They could read, they could play multiple instruments. They would just so you can't be Yes, you can't be Genesis, you can't be Pink Floyd, right? Because they're experts. And the idea was, oh, you're Joey Ramone. You can go out there and you can have heart and you can have attitude and you have soul and you can come out there and be like the New York Dolls or be like, you can have that kind of thing. And Nirvana brought it back. But the idea means that there's more people that could be into the idea of music creation if they don't have to have perfect pitch and be an Eddie Van Halen or Joe Satriani or Hendrix on the guitar. You don't have to. Like if you feel and you can push it over, your art can be legitimate. And as long as if you feel you're legitimate, you feel that you have a right to be on the stage, then other people will believe it too. You gotta, it's
Yeah.
like the self belief.
Yeah. Yeah. It just, or the undeniable compulsion. Like if I didn't write this book, I would have gone insane. You know, I had to, it was just something that I
Oh yeah,
had to
you're
do.
compulsed. Yeah, a lot of artists.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do it
So,
because you can't help it. Like artists, it's like you live and breathe the art, and you're gonna
mhm.
do it whether it's gonna make it or not. I don't know how many painters I talk to, people do theater, whether they're doing local theater, they just feel like they gotta do it, right? The
Mhm.
art kind of, it's like if you the type of artist that said, "Well, if I don't make it in a year, I'm just gonna keep on, doing something else. I'm never gonna do it again." I haven't really met a lot of people like that. Most of them still are doing it, and they've been doing it since they're like in their teens. They didn't
Yeah.
stop. They kept on going
And, and
because
what does
they
that
believe
mean?
no matter what.
What does that mean if I don't make it? This isn't my day job. I do this because I love it and that there's a fire inside that needs to release it. I work at
Mhm.
a library. I mean, I'm still around books and I'm still around creative, nerdy
Yeah.
people, but like I'm a public servant in the last place in our society that you're expected to go without spending money. You know, we're curators of information. We're
Resource.
information pushers, and that's about it. But like, if I didn't write, if I didn't like do fiddle around with photography, I would go insane. Like it's part of my um, it's part of my meditative practice for
Passion.
my
Yeah.
own
It
mental,
keeps
and,
your,
and also it's for my own mental health. Like if you took that away from me, like I would just whittle away and die.
but I think that's where a lot of people who find themselves having a lot of mental adversity are because they
Mm-hmm.
put themselves in the box where they don't feel they can do anything but that kind of, job that's really killing them. Like the job that has no, they don't have anything outside of the job. So they go to the
Yeah,
bar or they go into gambling, they get some kind of, they don't have a way of, because they
they don't have
never
that.
were told that there's other paths, or they were like the arts were like diminished or demeaned.
Mhm.
So they couldn't even perceive it was a way to go.
Yeah, 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 and it's really really sad too because it's like um, a lot of people just it goes back to that the importance of self awareness is that like society has all these different power structures and institutions that's telling you who you are. You need to learn how to separate yourself. Like, who is Thomas outside of the religion that he was raised in? Who is Thomas outside of the neighborhood he was raised in? Who is Thomas outside of the family he was raised in? Who is Thomas outside of the region he was raised in? Who is Thomas outside of the nation and the world that he was raised in? Like there's all these different layers, and and all these different layers are constantly like mining your mind to like
Mhm.
infiltrate and tell you who you are and what you are, and you have to have the audacity to be like, nah dude, that's, I don't know who I am right now, and it's up to me to figure that out, because from cradle to grave you're stuck with yourself, and you can alienate all the people you want to in the world, but you're still stuck with yourself. And it's I think it's important, and probably the most important job that you have outside of expressing yourself creatively is to figure out who the hell you are. And there's no finish line,
I think that's
because every
oh, sorry.
experience you
Yeah,
have
it's
is
it's
going to
never,
like
you're never
change
done.
that. Yeah, but it's
But you're
still, you
never
got to
really
figure it
done with
out.
that. Like a lot of people
Yeah.
say, a lot of times it's like it's an evolution. Like in terms of, like if you start realizing, like you go from phase to phase, in
Hmm.
life you go from, like you start to learn and you never stop learning. A lot of people make the mistake is they think they're going to be done learning. I don't
Hmm.
think you're done learning until you're not here.
No.
When you're
Yeah.
and even then, I'm a Buddhist. Say you're in the next phase, and you're going to be in another phase, right? So
Yeah.
I even believe that your phase is beyond that. So the idea that you're done. This is where we get mistakes. People think they get a piece of paper, I'm done. They get the
Yeah.
degree, I'm done. Then they get the job, and they get the money, and guess what? They're still not happy. With $1 million,
Yeah.
they're still not happy. With the stock options, they're still not happy because they did not, like what you're saying, they haven't really figured out what their story is and what their purpose is and what they really wanted. They thought the $1 million was going to satisfy the hole. It doesn't satisfy the hole. You get a bigger hole. You have to find something that actually matters beyond the other things.
Totally. I mean, I get you with like, we don't know what happens beyond, but as soon as you die, like you're done learning all you're going to learn in this reality. You know what I mean? So until you get to that space, allow yourself to be open to, you know, all the infinite possibilities that surround us.
Yeah, the limiting beliefs are so sad when people don't give themselves the opportunities that are all around. There's so many opportunities, but you know, I'm a cancer survivor. So that's kind of like my trauma. And you know, my wife is also a cancer survivor, so we have like both have that history. But it's you know, something like when you're talking about your brother's suicide, and sometimes the trauma is the inspiration. And some people either find a way to weave that into their path, or make it something that kind of stops their forward motion. You seem to be on the track where it's not stopping your forward progress.
Well, it's up to you, and again, that comes from a place of privilege. I'm not rich by any means of the imagination. I'm like lower middle class, but like there's still a level of privilege that I have compared to most of the world. And I'm aware of that, but it takes time to like there's a certain level of privilege to allowing yourself the space and time to take that trauma and transmute it into gold, you know, rather than allowing it to become poison and eating you up alive. So, but it just takes time, and there's no timeline on that. You know, you're going to mess up, you're going to screw up, you're going to make mistakes, but those are also opportunities. You know, a lot of the mistakes that we make as creatives when we're working on something, it's not like, oh man, I got to backtrack. It's like, nah, man, this is an opportunity to like, where can we go from here? So, and it's just all you can start from is where you're at, and you just have to remind yourself of that. And you shouldn't be in competition with anybody else and where they're at, whether they had the same trauma or not. I just not only that, but I think it's important. Like instead of comparing, like maybe like learn, like my view of reality is through that of a heterosexual white male. All right. That's my view of reality because that's what I am. Now I can have empathy and compassion for the plight of other people and their predicaments and their experiences. But like, I can only go so far with that. And I need to be open and willing to listen to people who are different from me to learn from them, to be able to like learn more about the world around me. Yeah. I mean, but like you can't. But that goes with like learning new things. Like I mean, it helps you become, I think, a better person. I think it helps, and as a creative person, I think it helps you become a better storyteller. Yeah.
Well, a lot of times we get caught in the dogma of the restrictions of our social norms, right? I was a sociology major. So the idea they have these social norms, and then nobody wants to be in the state of code, like anomie, which means you're not part of the norm, right? So you're kind of out in the world as the outsider. A lot of people don't want to be the outsider, so they conform to the norms, and then they don't realize, like, in conforming to those norms, they can be very oppressive to people who are kind of all over the spectrum. And if you're supposed to respect individuals in a society, it's about individuality. Your one person's individual freedom shouldn't be something that pushes down somebody else's freedom.
Like, no, not at all.
Like it, but you can't go and limit somebody else.
Totally,
that's probably living in. We got a world of people that want to limit their idea of freedom is they have the freedom to limit other people's freedom.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I think one of the things for me that has helped me be the person that I am is that I did recognize pretty early on that of the village that I'm a part of, I'm actually the hermit that lives on the hill on the outside of the hermit. Or I'm the hermit that lives on the outside of the village. So I'm the weird person, despite what my meat suit looks like. The way I express myself has put me outside there, but not for bad reasons. It's also because like I feel more comfortable over there.
It's
And
not a
then I
bad place
come
to be.
in,
It's not a bad
into
place
the
to be.
village and I hang
Yeah.
out, and or sometimes you get one or two brave souls to come up on the hilltop and be like, "Hey, what's that weird guy up there howling at the moon doing? What's he about?"
Well, it's not a bad place to have the freedom to not have, to kind of have a certain level, of fearlessness, but there's always still fear. That's what we're human beings. We're
Yeah.
driven by a need for safety, which causes a lot of problems. If you look at a lot of the societal problems, it's the need for safety and people's concept of what makes them safe that causes a lot of the conflict. And when
Mm-hmm.
you start to realize that the wolf at the door is not really the wolf at the door, right? And you start to
No,
understand your trigger and understand it's like you more than anybody outside of you, right? And so once
totally.
you start to learn to empathize, understand, and actually listen, I think a lot of problems today, people don't listen to the other person. They get triggered
Yeah,
by the other person. They're trying to win the argument. They're trying to win the conversation, and they actually don't hear the conversation.
totally. That's definitely our discourse right now. It's wild. Sometimes I just like watch that just for entertainment, and also to like have it's like more of like a research, like, oh, this is what's driving like the zeitgeist of the human consciousness in our country. Wow. All right. I'm gonna try not to engage in that.
I don't know how you got how you gonna get how you gonna go how you gonna get to the next level when you're trying to go like 10 steps back.
Yeah.
It's like if you
And
think about
drag
like
other
where
people
we
with you.
need to be, right? Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you want to go to Mars, you want to bring this to Mars, you really want to put that in the dome. You want to
Yeah.
put where yeah, it's like Fahrenheit 451. You can put that in the dome and
Yeah.
see what happens.
Yeah. Let's fix this planet before we try to terraform another one.
Yeah, go. You're gonna bring that to Mars and bring that to the asteroids, and like, really, you really want to bring that? Maybe you need to kind of do a little looking glass self examination. Like I was always a big fan of like the Victorian term of the looking glass self, which
Yeah.
is yeah, you look in that mirror and you try to understand, and that's what drove a lot of that Victorian romantic poetry, coming from like
Mm-hmm.
the Hawthorne, Longfellow, and Blake and Wordsworth. If you dive into it, they're all examining the human condition in different
Yeah.
ways, and because they were living in the Victorian age, they have a lot of masks, a lot of words hiding things. Like little death is like a word for
Yeah.
sex because they couldn't actually go out and say sex, so they had to hide it. They had to make other words up, and they'd have different layers of masking. But when you get down to it, it's like, oh, they're actually talking about this,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they weren't comfortable, so they still talked about it. They just put a code word over it, so people who weren't deep enough didn't understand what they were talking about. That's something that artists you sneak stuff in. As an artist, that's what you do. You sneak it in. It's like, okay, I'm going to sneak it in. It's like I'm still talking about it. You just don't know I'm talking about it.
Yeah, and I mean that's the way I even view some of like some ancient beliefs in religions. I'm working on an actual fiction book now. Hopefully, it won't take me 12 years to write, like this last one. But I've been doing like a lot of research into Gnosticism and taking those like ideas and making a modern story out of it. And when you read something, any type of religious text, and you look at it's a big difference if you look at it as a biography or if you look at it as like psychologically, like what does this mean in a
Yeah,
metaphorical sense to the psyche, and they're two vastly different explanations. So
yeah. Even the
um
philosophical aspects of things. Because if you look at it
yeah,
from like the philosophical, the metaphorical, like the spiritual, there's all these different levels you can go at something. And a lot of people like they take things at like face value. They
yeah,
they don't try to dive into it. Like in an older time, we didn't have TV, didn't have the internet. You would dive into the deeper meaning of things. Now everybody just goes for, oh, I can't be bothered to read anything you know, it takes me longer than 30 seconds.
I need somebody else to tell me.
I can't dive into that, so I'm not going to read.
Yeah, I need somebody.
I have the AI tell me what Shakespeare said because I can't take the time to read what he said.
And it better be in a 15-second TikTok video.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, so that I think we're kind of not doing ourselves a disservice. Like even with music, you know, I find like I've come from an age where songs could be 6 minutes, 7 minutes, be a whole side. Yes, would do a whole side of an album as one song. Pink Floyd would do that. Now people are saying, "Well, you can't do that because the song has to be like 2 minutes and 15 seconds." Like what? Like, what if the song needs that? You tell me I can't do it? Like, really?
Yeah, that's what I love. I mean, I love Pink Floyd is like one of my favorite bands too, and I think The Wall is probably like the most underrated film of all time. But like that's why I love Tool is that like most of their songs, their new album, like their songs are like 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes long. And when you watch the musician perform the amount of like energy that they put into giving, again, back to like, here's inspiration. I'm creating this body of work. Do something with it when you leave this building tonight. You know, like Maynard, he's really into big, like, put your cell phones away. Security has been warned. If they see you with your cell phone out, you will be removed from the building. This is a participatory experience. We're creating something. We need you to pay attention. And I love that. I love that so much because I feel like it's very ceremonial and sacred when like art has power to transform. And we shouldn't take it lightly.
Right. There's this one quote distracted, you know.
Yeah, there's this one quote by this psychedelic philosopher that I've always loved. Terence McKenna. Art's task is to save the soul of mankind, and anything less is a dithering while Rome burns. For it is the artists who journey into the other. If the artist cannot find the way, then the way cannot be found. I love that. Well, it's going whatever the problem is. But whatever that the problem is, it's going to take a creative mind that like looks at things from an artistic viewpoint to solve the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem because we got a lot of people today that think AI is gonna replace everybody. And I'm like, really?
Those people haven't watched Terminator.
What idea? Like Elon's like, oh, Elon's gonna saying, oh, it's gonna replace everybody's job, and you just sit home and get paid by society that's gonna pay you to stay home. Yeah, you know, that's a world that has no idea what the value creativity has. And the problem I have with some of these tech millionaires is they undervalue the arts. They undervalue the artists. They don't consider, they say, well, that's just a resource. Well, you're charging for your algorithm. Your AI algorithm charges for a fee, but you don't want to pay the artist that was trained on. Yeah. So you're saying the technology is actually more valuable than the art that you taught your machine on. Yeah. That's a wrong-headed point of view. And I'm sorry, like I understand a lot of people like AI, but that kind of point of view is going to be to the detriment of humanity if you don't understand the value of the arts.
AI is like any other technology right now. It's a tool, like how, and I think technology isn't a bad thing in general, but it reveals the negative aspects of the user. And we have shown time and time again that our emotional intelligence has not as evolved nearly as fast as our ability to shape matter.
Yeah, that's the problem. The problem is if you have a tool, they can violate people's copyrights and patents, and it allows you just to globally do it. And the lawyers haven't caught up. Well, you can do it, but eventually, just like what happened with sampling, eventually the law catches up with you. And eventually, that you're not going to just be able to go wild west to just taking things without paying the people who did it. Now, tech is good, and I understand. I'm in tech. I'm a software designer. Yeah, but I understand like it's garbage in, garbage out. It's still the same. You prompt something, you get something back. That doesn't mean what you got back is actually right.
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
mean that it's actually the best answer. And the problem is people will go with the first thing they get back. And that's the
yeah,
problem.
yeah. And we as users need to be a little bit more emotionally aware to take responsibility for how we use things too. You know what I mean? Like we can't. I don't see any need for me to like. I'm not going to use ChatGPT to write a book. It's not going to understand the nuance of my emotions. You know, there's emotions that exist within inside the human psyche that still doesn't have a word to explain it, and that's what poetry's for.
Well, yeah, it's the thing. I mean, I saw somebody said, "Well, why don't you just put out a book on Amazon and have ChatGPT write it?" I'm like, "What's the point of writing that? What is the point of writing that? Oh, just so I have a product." Well, the point of that was like to have a product, to have
Yeah.
something to sell. See, that's the problem with the mindset. That's a mindset. That's a
Hmm.
mindset again that doesn't understand art. It doesn't think
Yeah.
art is valuable. That it wants to use a trick to get something, to create a form, and then be able to sell that widget. And then you're basically
Yeah.
turning the book or the poetry into a widget that you can just monetize. And
Yeah.
that's your right if that's how you view things. But I think that's what where the art community is like we feel that the human beings are always going to be involved in that. You can use tools, but the human being is always going to be the center of creative capability.
Agreed. It's necessary.
But I haven't talked too much about your website. I know you're a podcaster, and before we
Yeah.
leave, I do want to give a shout out to your two podcasts. Like you actually have a podcast channel. When you do two podcasts, can you briefly talk about both of those before we
So
sign off?
you can get to it from the Rise Phoenix website, but if you were to be on Spotify or Apple, you just type in Rise Frequency, and that'll get you to the
Mhm.
page. And then on there, there's different logos and titles that separate the two different podcasts. One is Inner Monologue, which has the most episodes on there, but I still haven't done one in over a year. And that's more of a it's kind of like a setting like this where it's a conversational interview, talking with people and how they deal with like depression, anxiety, if they've had addiction or eating disorders or anything like that. And a lot of times they talk about how like art and creativity kind of like help them navigate their own personal mental health issues. And then the other one I created, it's called Stages. It's more of an audio diary, and I started that about 6 months after my mom died as a
Mhm.
way to just kind of like process my own grief. I'm a big fan of therapy. You take your car in
Process it.
all the, you take your car in to get looked at every few months so that it doesn't like break down. You should do the same thing for your head and your heart. And I am in therapy right now, but I think like getting on the microphone and just
Yeah,
emoting. And
that's a
I
good
hope
idea.
that
I mean,
people get something out of it. It's super serious. Sometimes I'm laughing at a super serious subject, and I'm not laughing to like overshadow it or to push it away. I'm laughing in spite of it. So those are the two podcast stages. Comes out every other week. Inner Monologue used to be weekly, but now it's like whenever I find somebody who's willing to be that I trust and that is also willing to be on the show. And then I'm continuing to write my book 2012, Bicycle Odyssey, 7,000-mile bicycle journey for suicide awareness and the healing power of art is on Amazon. There's a link on our website. Um,
mhm.
that's about my bike ride that I did for my brother Mark, who died by suicide back in 2001. Um, I think people that love movies and music will like it. That's all I'm going to say. There's a nod. There's a frequent nod to pop culture that just permeates that entire book. It was a labor of love. I learned a new skill set, um, and I hope to write more, both fiction and nonfiction, before it's time for me to leave this planet in this reality. But you can go to risephoenix.org. That's going to get you to my book. That's going to get you to the podcasts, and that's going to get you to the social media. I spend most of my time on Instagram.
Okay, well, thank you. We do have to end this. I have another podcast, but
That's
I want
fine.
people to go and click on the www.risephoenix.org to get to your main site. And we will be published everywhere. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. By tomorrow, we'll be on all the other podcast platforms where you can listen to or view this podcast. But thank you for being a guest on the Family Lunch and Such podcast.
Phantom, thank you so much. You've been an absolute pleasure, man. I appreciate this.
Thank you. Have a good night.